What channels do you think marketeers should be focusing on now?
Things are evolving. The channels are evolving. So it's always important for us to reset our assumptions. There's more routes to the customer than ever before.
A lot of people are talking about the long and the short of it. I'd love to get your take on the mix.
It's about brand and performance. It's not brand versus performance. It's how those two work together in order to drive short-term and long-term effects.
If you're launching a marketing campaign today, there's probably never been as many challenges facing marketeers. But you know what? There's also never been as much potential. Things are changing, and they are changing wild and fast. And in all of that, I totally get that marketeers feel a little overwhelmed, to say the least. You're possibly wondering right now what you should be spending on your brand marketing or your performance marketing. You're questioning your media mix. You're thinking about all these tools that are suddenly available. What should you be using to drive growth? And before you even think about how you should measure, you need to stop and think, what should I be measuring? Today's conversation is going to help you with all of that. I am excited to be joined by one of the world's leading marketing effectiveness experts, Rica Facundo. Rica is the managing editor of WARC Asia. She's had roles at Unilever, Saatchi & Saatchi, Publicis, Iris, and she is an in-demand speaker on this topic. She's spoken at Cannes, at South by Southwest in Sydney, and Spikes. And you know what she does brilliantly, which I love? She's really, really good at framing a challenge as an opportunity. Rica, hello, welcome. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Listen, we're thrilled to have you. And I know at the end of this conversation, everyone watching is going to leave with a ton of ideas and insights. So I'm excited to get into this.
Let's go.
Rica, every year, I feel like I say this will be a pivotal year. And every year does feel like a pivotal year in this incredible age of change. And I guess I'm feeling right now 2025 is no different. I'd love to know, what do you think is pivotal this year?
I mean, I hear you, Sarah. I mean, I feel like the pace of change keeps getting faster and faster. There's always a disruption looming around the corner here and there. And I think, generally, when I speak to marketers, one of the feelings that I get is everyone is really overwhelmed. There is aggressive growth targets. There's a lot of disruption happening in the industry. Budgets are tight, need to do more with less. The list goes on and on. And of course, from a tech perspective, there's just so much, there's so much data available. There's so many channels available. So there's a sense of overwhelm. But you could argue that the sense of overwhelm has been happening for a while now. But I think we're at a point where at least the technology and the tools are catching up, and to kind of provide a sense of relief for marketers who are trying to navigate all of this, whether it's AI, more sophisticated measurement platforms and whatnot. And I think now it's not just about having all of this data; it's about really sense-making this data and not taking it on a surface level. And the savvy marketers are the ones who really know how to use use all of these opportunities, the abundance of things that we have, and use it a lot more strategically.
There really are so many challenges. So I'm hearing you talk about this multi-channel, there's a data overload. So how do you see the top marketeers out there responding to all of this? What trends are you seeing in the way they're thinking about these challenges and opportunities?
I think at the end of the day, we need to remember the role of marketing, right? At the end of the day, we're a business, and it's about how you use marketing to deliver business results. And yes, there's a lot of things happening, but it's also about connecting the dots amongst all the different levers of marketing. So recently, WARC produced what we call the WARC's Marketer Toolkit. There are 5 different trends in there, but I want to talk about 3 of them in particular. The first one is the economic reset, which I think would provide a sense of relief from my answer earlier where I said there was a lot of overwhelm. But one of the concerns that they have, which, it's always been there, but I think it's more pronounced now, is the threat of competition, from white labels, from cheaper alternatives and whatnot. So then you need to think about, as a marketer, at the end of the day, marketing and brand building in particular, it demonstrates the value that you are trying to give to your consumers. And one of the advice that we give there is that marketers need to reclaim price as the forgotten P in the marketing mix. Again, this idea of marketing is holistic. There are different levers. It's not just promotion, but this idea of price. So that's kind of like the first trend. The second trend is one of my favorite trends personally, which is closing the gap between customer experience as well as with brand experience. Our customer experience is something that is not just handled by the marketing team. It's not just about, it's not traditionally within the remit of just advertising. Customer experience is something that touches across multiple different departments. But you need to be able to see how customer experience also drives brand experience in bringing people into the funnel, in encoding those brand memories and whatnot. And because if you don't think about that, then actually there's a huge gap and there's a lot of money left onto the table. And the third trend I'll talk about is kind of this age of media abundance. As a editor or as a writer, I always have to describe our media ecosystem. And there's one word I always use. I actually kind of hate the word, but it is reality, which is fragmentation, right? Everyone usually talks about fragmentation as it's a pain, more channels, to plan my media budget around. And if you're handling multiple markets, it gets just, again, that complexity keeps being added. But if you flip it, actually, there's more routes to the customer than ever before. And, again, savvy marketers know how to lean into the age of abundance and use the strengths of different channels to drive not just short-term business effects, but also long-term business effects. So those are kind of the three trends that I'm really seeing really will help marketers boost their marketing impact going into 2025 and beyond.
Rica, you co-authored Beyond the Horizon with Google, which is a fascinating white paper all about a holistic path to measurement and the measurement of media investments. And in our last episode, we looked at MMMs in detail, but today we're all about what that holistic marketing strategy is all about. And so I'd love to start with the basic question. What is a holistic marketing strategy?
Sarah, well, the answer to that question really depends on who exactly you're talking to, but that's why I think I'm going to give maybe 2 to 3 different answers that covers the gamut of what that could mean for a marketer. The first one, I'd like to define it in terms of your objectives or the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. A holistic marketing strategy in that sense is not just about long versus short, but it's about how your marketing investment can deliver across both of those types of metrics. So that's because as a business you need both, right? You need to deliver today, but at the same time you need to set yourself up for success in the future. The second way of defining holistic marketing is through measurement. So there are 2 parts to the measurement bit. The first one is related to what I said about long and short. So making sure that are you just looking at what you're measuring with a short-term lens? But because if you are, you're putting yourself at a disservice, which is why you need to have bigger picture, right? Long and short, stepping back, bigger picture. But the other side of measurement is, of course, MMM. They're very effective, but I would like to remind everyone that MMM is just one tool out of different tools, right? But usually the rule of thumb, I think, is like trifecta of measurement approaches. So again, it's about understanding what all these different measurement tools, how they can help you validate or test different things. Because if there was a measurement tool that answered everything, that I think would make our lives easier. So that's from a measurement perspective. Then you can also think about holistic marketing from a channel or media perspective, because you and me, we're consumers. I mean, we probably see brands, engage with one brand across different types of touch points. So a holistic media strategy in that sense is really understanding all the different channels, all the different touch points that are available to consumer in their consumer journey. So 3 different answers. You pick the interpretation that is most useful for you.
So you mentioned long-term and short-term, and I think This is something that's really picking up pace in discussion, right? So a lot of people are talking about the long and the short of it. And, in my lifetime in advertising, it used to be about above the line versus below the line, that it was about brand versus performance. And now the framing is sort of long-term and short-term. I'd love to get your take on the mix. Should we be doing one, the other, both?
I answer you in two parts. So the first one, actually, let us remember that to the consumer, they don't care if it's ATL or BTL. It doesn't matter if it's brand or performance. It's just advertising to them at the end of the day. Which brings me to my second point, and maybe this is something I'm extra sensitive to as someone who is in an editorial position. But we have to always be conscious of the words that we use as shortcuts, or frameworks that we use as shortcuts to navigate, again, all this chaos and complexity. So brand versus performance, or the long and short of it, that was a really helpful mental model that really established the foundation of the effectiveness industry, right? But actually, if we look at it today, sometimes these frameworks at certain points can be unhelpful, right? Because I think there is an unnecessary binary. I don't think that was the intention with, Les Binet and Peter Field when they put that out, right? But the intention was not to split it out and have this silo, but that's the way it ended up being. So that's an unhelpful binary, because it's about brand and performance. It's not brand versus performance. It's how those two work together in order to drive short-term and long-term effects. And the reason is because all of these things work, they don't work in isolation of each other. They work together, right? They drive these different synergies. And recently WARC launched a multiplier effect study based on US database that also found the same thing. I am based in Singapore, and I'm working on a similar study in Asia that also found the same thing. Actually, if you invest in brand equity, it's not just good for the long-term results. It actually boosts your performance if you, boost your performance in the short term, versus if you just had a marketing plan that just focused on, over-indexed on performance. So you really have to bring both of those together. I think the other, from a measurement perspective, the other unhelpful framework is, how is this idea that, is short-term ROI your North Star? And this is something that we called out in the white paper that WARC produced with Google, because it doesn't matter if you have all these tools, all these data, all these channels that you can play in. If you're only looking at all these opportunities with a short-term mindset, then the only thing you're going to see is short-term results. But in actuality, your advertising sometimes works, not sometimes, most often than not, will also have long-term effects. But if you're only measuring 4 weeks, you're not actually, you're misclassifying the performance of your campaign. And that was another key finding from the report that we did with Google, which I believe the headline was, you ignore a short-term ROI, ignores half of your media returns, something like that.
We've talked a lot about brand building, and so maybe we should dig into brand building and the benefits of that a little bit more. What are the other returns that you see from investing in brand beyond sales?
I mean, for me, when I see sales, it's the harder side of returns, but I love kind of also shining light on the softer aspects. And at the end of brand can represent the stored the stored value that the business has in the eyes of the consumers. And embedded in that is about brand trust. It's about whether or not your consumers trust you to keep, buying from you when, inflation increases, to talk about you, to recommend you. And, brands play a role in the life of the consumer. So I think that's another aspect of the power of a brand, is in connecting. A strong brand is one that has a really strong connection with your customers. Another one, I think I kind of alluded to it. I guess it is back to sales, but maybe not, sales in particular, but it buffers against things like price increases, right? So brand, your best defense against all of these different things that are happening, right? It's something that, you know, can grow your business engine, and it can also be your shield in that way, right? But, you know, protecting you from all these other things that are happening, whether it's like price increases, whether it's, you know, in the worlds of PR, your consumers who are, you know, it's cancel culture and whatnot. A strong brand can withstand those kinds of pressures because they have trust in, you know, their equity and the relationship and the credibility that they have with consumers.
I hear you. You know, brands really build perceived value, right, in the mind of the consumer. And I love your connection back to price. And I actually think price is something that's chronically overlooked in marketing strategy today. Like going back to the 4 Ps makes a lot of sense. It might help look at an example. I remember in your marketeer's toolkit for 2025, you talked about a McCain case study. And I thought that might be an interesting example on this topic of price.
So let me just set the scene a little bit. So the situation that they were in was that, you know, the increasing competition. They found that more people were, you know, shopping in discount stores where their products were not found. So they faced a situation which I'm pretty sure every marketer will face, which is, do I react to this by resorting into discounts and going to what we also like to call the discount spiral of doom, which is doing too much of that. It will do your brand a disservice. Or they could actually invest in long-term brand building. And what they decided to do was invest in long-term brand building. And the amazing thing about this case study, we get a lot of cases that do that, but they committed to the strategy for 10 years. They really wanted to use brand building as a way to build future demand for their business. And by doing so, they're able to you know, increase sales. You know, later when you know, the price of sunflower oil came up, they were able to kind of buffer against that. They were still able to maintain growth even at a higher price point. And yes, the results are great, but I really want to call out the commitment. 10 years, Sarah. Tell me someone who has committed to the same strategy for 10 years. Not only about, you know, withstanding that from the external change, but a lot of internal change. So I think that is really brave in a world where there's so much change. The question is, what don't you change? Or what do you double down on, which you know works, because they've built that trust and having a commitment to it. And I don't think that's, you know, I think we don't shed light on that enough.
No, I love that. We are obsessed with newness, aren't we? And newness is not always better. So you talked about brand building and the marketing mix and the relationship between brands and pricing. I'd also like to look at like your thoughts on the investment mix. So you think about the marketing mix and where you should invest. Right, so we're talking about what you invest in brand building, what you invest in performance over the short, the long term. How do you think about that? How do you get that balance right? Because I guess the initial reaction is there's a budget implication to this, right? If we want to do more, which is essentially what we're saying, we want to do all of it. How do you get that mix right?
So historically, the advice or the rule of thumb about how you balance, you know, investment is the 60-40 split. However, you know, there is no magic bullet. That number really depends on your category, the size of the brand, etc. However, on the multiplier effect, we talk about this idea of the brand investment spectrum, but more importantly, what is your brand baseline? Because let's be real, there are certain times when, of course, investing in performance marketing, you know, makes sense for that period of time, but there should be a baseline which the study indicated was 30% of your budget should still be, you know, kept for investing in equity. But the optimal split, and this is interesting because I'm seeing this number consistently across, again, different studies, it's kind of more of a 50-50 than a 60-40.
And do you think that's true, Rica, for small brands and younger brands as well as big brands?
Again, it's very context specific. So I'm just going to interpret the type of brand that you're talking about as maybe like a digital upstart, which seems to be what the type of new brand that is starting today. I think life stage plays a very big important role in this. So usually digital upstarts, they're hyper-focused on customer acquisition, right? Which is maybe why they would over-index on performance, for example. But as you start to mature as a brand, then maybe you need to start also, spreading that a little bit more evenly. Because if you're just going to be focusing on customer acquisition, then again, because you need to balance, then you're going to put yourself on the back foot, like in the future. So I believe, that's what's happening with, I think, brands like Airbnb. Airbnb was the big D2C brand of at least my time, right? And I think they have come out to say that, the importance of integrating more, brand into their media mix.
That's really helpful. And I think, these investment decisions, they're going to involve more stakeholders than the CMO. And I know you have an awful lot of experience in explaining the value of marketing. And so I'd love to jump over to how you think CMOs today, looking at this modern mix, this fresher media mix that involves kind of looking at it through a potentially new lens for many of the CFOs or the CEOs they're dealing with or their boards. How do you help those marketeers communicate the value of marketing?
Well, the most important thing is aligning on metrics. So, things like impressions and click, let's be clear that those are metrics that are useful for marketing teams. So, they're still useful, right? When a CMO is working with this team. But when you're then starting to communicate upwards, your CFO is not going to care about, clicks. They're going to care about how marketing helped, increase market share, drove customer acquisition. So aligning those metrics is incredibly important, because there are the hard metrics, but there's also the softer elements as well, about building a strong, trusted relationship with your, with the rest of your board. And it's also about being transparent, right? Every time I interview a marketer, you always want to say, oh, this is what worked, this is what was good, but I always am moved by the ones who are quite candid about, this didn't move the needle for X, Y, Z reasons. You need to align on the metrics that matter, but you also need to understand the type of organization that you're working for, right? What do they prioritize? At Cannes last year, one of my favorite presentations, and I got to interview the CMO after, was from Instacart, which is a US delivery platform, and very tech first, and before coming in, she had all this experience. So she came in. On paper, she did everything right. She built the case for brand building. She got the budget for it. Did a really big campaign with Lizzo, which is just very brand focused. But at the end of the day, the results didn't show. So what was more interesting to me is what she did next, which is I think previously they treated the brand and performance teams as separate divisions. But actually, going back to my earlier point, is that don't have those binaries, right? Investing in brand actually boosts performance. So they kind of combine those two teams together, trying to figure out, what is the strategy, what is the creative that can do both at the same time, because they were doing both. In Instacart, which is a, very, tech first, which is a bit more, very prioritizing the performance and the impact. They could demonstrate already, hey, see, investing in brand boosted the sales by X, Y, and Z. So because that was a type of company that she was working, it was really important to demonstrate that brand could show some immediate result right away versus just, brand health over time.
I love that example. Let's talk about channels more broadly, right? So we're talking about, how much is available to marketeers. It's the era of abundance, and there is an abundance of channels. And I'd love to know your perspective on what channels you think marketeers should be focusing on now and why.
I can tell you what the hot channels are right now. There's retail media networks, there's podcasts, social commerce. However, I think the better conversation is not about what's hot right now, but it's really about understanding what role do these channels play in a larger media mix. So remember earlier, Sarah, when you asked me to define holistic marketing, I think I spoke about this idea of synergy. I don't think the question is not just what channels you should be on, but it's also about how many channels you need to be on in order to increase the impact and the likelihood that you're going to be seen by the consumer. And there's a lot of different research that points to the fact that just increasing from 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 channels actually maximizes the payback that of your marketing investment. So again, there are always going to be new and upcoming channels because I think, brands always want to be where consumers are. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is, don't just leverage what's popular, leverage what's effective, right? It's important to really interrogate that channel. Does it suit your business? Are there the right brand safety aspects into that? So again, always interrogating and understanding really what is the role and the nuance of this channel in driving your business outcomes.
We even see that lift in effectiveness in our own platforms with Google when marketeers use one or more channels like search and YouTube. So that really does ring true. Do you think as well there's something about the new roles that channels are taking on at the moment? Like, I think the role of each channel is potentially a bit surprising, and it's about reappraising those channels maybe too?
No, I think it's exactly that, right? Things are evolving. The channels are evolving. The features and that each of these channels can offer to brands are evolving. So it's always important for us to reset our assumptions about the role of these different channels. Let me give you example. In the, a binary from before is that, it's traditional channels like TV and cinema are the ones that are the best at delivering brand awareness metrics, for example. But I've seen evidence where actually having that in the media mix is also has an impact on the short term. And if you go look on the other side, and if you look at new media with online advertising, so when online advertising was growing up, so to speak, it was really associated with performance advertising. Right. And that is what led to what a lot of marketers call, the era of performance, because the thing is with digital is that it's easily trackable, it's easily measured. Right. So then again, I think we're over indexing on that. But now, these online platforms are also, evolving, and they're also giving features that also are conducive to brand building as well. And there's a lot of evidence that demonstrates that even online advertising can deliver full funnel effects. So again, it's just interrogating those assumptions and roles because things are always changing. And you just really need to understand how that fits with what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, I love that. So there's no silver bullet here, unfortunately, folks. But before I let you go, I have to ask you one final question, and we're asking all of our guests this season this question. So here we go. If you are a small business and you are fighting for your place in the market, you're the CEO or maybe you're the CMO, and you have less than $10,000 in your business account after essential expenses, and you need to keep the doors open, and you decide to spend that $10,000 all on marketing to give you the best chance, what do you do? Where do you put that $10,000?
So you only have, was it $10,000? I'm sure a lot of people can relate to less budget, do more, right? So I think there are 3 parts to my answer. The first one is really the quality of the creative idea and using that to your advantage, because there's a lot of studies that show that all things being equal, a quality of a creative idea can supercharge your effectiveness by, I think it was about 47%. I don't have a creative idea for you now, but it has to be a really good idea. But what should be the intended impact of that creative idea? It should be an idea that generates fame. Now, when I usually say the word fame, people think, it's about, it's an output of creativity. You want to be famous and viral, win awards because you're so famous. But actually, you should think about fame as an input of brand equity, because usually if your campaign generates fame, more people are talking about it, right? You're involving your community, there's conversation. So that earned media element is what is going to help you become more top of mind in the minds of your consumers. So again, have a fame generating element to it. And lastly, like, where should I put my media dollars, right? So online advertising is always one of the cheaper, types of media. However, like what I was saying earlier is that it's, if your budget can afford, it's like, how can you pair that with other channels as well to drive that, synergistic effect. So I think those are the 3 parts to my answer.
I love it. Thanks, Rica. You've been a fabulous guest. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom and your insights. I've learned a ton talking to you this morning. So from over here to over where you are, thank you, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been a pleasure talking to you about some of my favorite topics.